Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you to the Farmer Friday webinar series with Great Plains Regeneration. I'm Jessica Nadd. I'll be your host this afternoon, and I have some wonderful friends on the line with us today that are going to be helping us out. And this is always my favorite part of a webinar is like I get to watch the screen fill up with all of our friends and supporters off to the side that are excited to join the call. And I know it's a busy time of year, so I want to thank everybody in advance for taking your lunch hour to pop on here and learn a little bit more about regenerative agriculture. So special thanks to my friend, Dr. Liz Haney. She is our Zoom ninja that works behind the scenes to help support our technology today. She's fantastic at it. Thank you so much, Liz. Calling in from Texas. All right, well, here we go. Let's get started. And just as a reminder, if you would like to, oh no, my Zoom quit. Don't send. Okay, give me a thumbs up if you guys can hear me.
Yes, it's all good. It's all good, Jessica. You want me to take off? Okay, I'll get started here. Hi, my name is Rick Clark. I am a fifth generation farmer from West Central Indiana. And today we're going to talk a little bit about some specialty, I don't know if they're really considered specialty crops, but I think they're ideas to help incorporate into your current rotation. Now, we are in the process of becoming 100% certified organic, and we are doing this with no tillage. So it's all being done with cover crops to suppress weeds. Cover crops are fueling the corn or the milo or whatever the case may be that we might be growing. And that's why I'm very intrigued about peas. I think that the future of what we're going to see, and it's already happening now, we're doing it on our farm now, but I think what's going to happen is we're going to start raising multiple cash crops at the same time, and we're going to start harvesting those cash crops at the same time. When you start to look at abiding by the principles of soil health, one of those principles is diversity. And I think when we talk about diversity, we're talking about massive cocktails of cover crops and the rotation that you may have within your cash crop choices. But I would like to also add to that diversity, the diversity of raising cash crops at the same time. And here's what I mean by that. We're doing testing right now on the farm. And as you can see on this slide, these peas were planted in on November the 1st. So let me back up just a little bit. We, West Central Indiana, we're not going to plant wheat much before September 25th. So I like to wait till that first week in October. So we planted wheat around October the 2nd. And I then got a crazy notion. I talked to the folks at Puris, and I talked to some other folks, and I said, could we plant a winter hardy pea into this wheat and let's see what we can do. Now, nobody really had any great testing on this that I'm aware of, so we went for it. Now, these peas were planted, as you can see, on November 1st, so about 30 days after the wheat was planted. and the wheat was about 4 inches tall when we planted these peas. And we had a very abnormal, I'm going to call it abnormal fall last year, where we were very warm well into that first week of December. So you look at the growth that took place in about 40 days. And I'll be honest with you, I was a little bit concerned that the peas came out of the ground that far and had that much growth. Now, we were trying to plant these peas 3 inches deep because I wanted them deep and I wanted to protect them. So we drilled the wheat with our John Deere air seeder, and then we came back with the corn planter and we planted right before the ground froze. So the concept here is that we're trying to look at this in two different ways. The first way is to have a crop growing with another crop, and either A, we're gonna harvest those two crops together, or no, we will harvest those two crops together, and they will stay commingled and be sold to the end user, let's say a dairy in this instance, and the dairy is going to take that, and that pea is going to raise that protein by 4 or 5%, and that's a way for that dairy to add this into their ration to get more protein into the ration. That's one way to look at this. Second way to look at this would be to harvest the two together and then separate them. Now, here's a third way to look at this. Let's say now that you wanted to raise a cover crop package that was going to be for corn next spring. And we're looking for ways to grow species that fix nitrogen. This pea is a tremendous source of nitrogen. It is approximately 2 pounds of nitrogen per bushel of yield. So if we could raise 40 bushel peas, which I think that's quite doable, that's about 80 pounds of nitrogen that's going to be available then for either A, that first cash crop you're going to plant next spring, so let's say it's corn, or B, if you go into this scenario that I'm setting up here of wheat and peas, or triticale and peas, I mean, that would be a great option. Triticale and peas, take that to a dairy. Then you come behind that with a milo or a millet or something that will make a 65 to 75 day window of growth. Now you've got a nitrogen source for that next cash crop. And now we're going to raise 3 cash crops on that same acre. That's the type of stuff that excites me. So this is what these peas look like this spring on March the 6th. You can see the wheat growing in the background. And these peas survived the winter quite well. And we had a very brutal winter this year, but we did have snow cover for most of the time that we had the Canadian clippers come down. We had 2 or 3 Canadian clippers come down. We got to -10 for 2 or 3 or 4 days. And then we were below 10 degrees for at least 2 weeks. So I was very pleased with how these peas survived the winter. But the testing is what we have to do. And I'm in communication with Puris almost daily. I talk to someone at Puris almost every day. And we are heading into an experimental phase, and we are going to plant some cold tolerant peas that Puris has. Okay. I've been approved to say this today. But it's extremely experimental, and it's small acreage, and we're going to see how this works. Now I've been in contact with dairies that are in our area, and they've got hammer mills, and they are more than comfortable with bringing a triticale or a wheat or a barley, maybe even with the peas commingled. Their hammer mill will smash those peas out enough to put it in the ration to where it becomes a digestible input then for their cattle. So we've done our due diligence here. We've got Puris behind us to test these peas, and we've got an end user that will take them together, or we're within an hour of a organically certified facility that will separate these two products, and then we could sell them into the cash market. Now, that's what these peas look like this spring. That picture was taken about 3 weeks ago. So I'm very excited about this. And what I'll tell you what I really am the most excited is the fact that you have several outs here. You know, you leave the product commingled, take it to a dairy. You separate the product and you sell them separately. You keep the product in the field and it becomes another nitrogen source for your next cash crop. And then the other thing I really like is this widens out the window of our northern tier states that are always complaining about their window of opportunity is so much smaller than it is in the I states, for example, because of their shortened growing season. I really like where this could all be heading. And again, I truly think that we are heading down, and I'm talking about in the world that I'm in now, which is regenerative, organic, with no tillage. You know, I think we plant 90-inch corn and we plant vegetables in between the corn. And now you're harvesting 2 cash crops in that same acre. I think you're planting faba beans and corn together, harvest those two together and separate them out at the end of the day. I think peas fall into this category quite easily. And we got to remember here, now Brent's going to talk a lot. I mean, I'm not an expert on their product. He is. I've only talked about winter hardy peas. We can plant other peas they have in the springtime and incorporate them into this same system in other ways. So that's really all I have here on this presentation to talk about this, Jessica. I am ready for some Q&A, but I am really excited about the prospect of the flexibility that the pea has.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Rick. You always come in and save the day for me. So thank you. Those of you that joined late, my Zoom quit unexpectedly, and no excuses because I don't have all of these children in my house today. I finally had a free Friday without the kiddos. So thank you so much for hopping on and help me out. But you know, Rick, this is really fascinating. And one thing that I'm going to put my presentation in the chat, we don't need to go back and do it all, but Great Plains Regeneration as a nonprofit is really focused on activation of our programming in 3 main ways. And the first way is farmer to farmer education and outreach. The second is watershed restoration work that we're doing with our fiscal partners, Kansas Alliance for Wetlands and Streams. And then the third is really being able to support new market development. And what does that mean for the producer, and what sort of options can we guide them towards? But then even from Great Plains Regeneration, looking at what we do through the lens of a business. This is a business. You know, you talk about that a lot in your presentation. And so when opportunities come your way, you are a man who is taking a look at your operation and what's best on the business side of things, but you're doing that also through the lens of soil. Right. So talk a little, kind of expand a little bit on that.
Yeah, yes, that's great. Thank you for bringing that up, because I did not mention that. I truly agree and abide by the principles of soil health. They have to be maximized at their fullest potential. And crop rotation is critical for the success of this system. And that's what this is. It's a systematic approach, because one of the things I get asked about all the time is, how do I deal with pests? Well, we don't have a lot of pests because our system is heading toward balance. And the reason why we're heading toward balance is because we've taken away the harmful attributes that kill the beneficial species. So once you keep the beneficials in balance, you then get a rotation of multiple cash crops. Our neighbors here, Jess, are farming 2 crops, corn and soybeans. We are up to 7 here now: corn, soybeans, wheat, alfalfa, peas, milo, and cattle. And then we also throw in one more, I call it regen. And regen is when you take an acre out of production and you give it everything that you can of a cold season, or a cool season cocktail, a warm season cocktail, and then you pound it with the cocktail that you want for next year's cash crop. That's another way for these northern states and even arid states. I mean, you may not, people think of being in an arid environment that we can't plant cover crops because it's going to take away all the moisture that we have, and it's so precious. Well, actually, it's the other way around. If you plant something that's diverse, you can't plant monocultures here, but you plant diverse cover crop packages into an arid environment. I'm talking 12 inches of rain or less. The success of growth of that cover crop is exponentially higher with the diversity, and you're going to have now that biomass to lay down and put an armor on the soil and slow down or mitigate evaporation. So all of this stuff plays into each other, and you are exactly right. And let me throw out one more thing. We have to stop looking at logistics of just out our back door for these markets. Okay. If you're going to work with Puris, unless you live close to one of their facilities, you're going to have trucking involved, and that's okay. So you can't let an hour of trucking deter you from trying a different product. And right now, Jess, I would say we are averaging one way right now about an hour and 20-minute drive one way. So you have to open up your mind and look for those outlets. And Puris is a company that's on the move, and they are probably, I don't know this, but they're probably trying to add facilities and infrastructure. Brent can get into more of that, but this is exciting times for us.
Yeah, that was one thing that we're kind of getting some questions in the chat here too, but transportation is always the key. And I think that's a limiting factor. And so one question I had, and maybe Brent covers this later, is if you end up taking the commingled product to get it separated, is that still on you? Like, do you have to coordinate that, get it get it separated, and then you have to coordinate it from there too?
Yes, I would say that's probably, and Brent can come right in on that one. Go ahead, Brent.
Yeah, so as far as commingling products, we have some growers where they'll grow oats or another crop that's intercropped with it and then separate that out. Primarily in the organic is where we've seen that production method, and it's primarily, in different areas as far as the Midwest goes. With that, realistically, it's in the best benefit because you're going to be able to separate that out to gain on both sides of the market there. In addition to that, as far as freight and those types of things, it's going to be much better to have a load that comes into our facilities that's primarily all peas, because the other is going to be, if it's oats or wheat or anything like that, to us, it's FM from a processor side. So it's better for a producer to be able to separate those out, both on the transportation cost and being able to get the best value, like Rick was speaking with there.
Okay, cool. Well, Brent, since we're kind of doing things backwards here, I did have a slide about you and your background. And initially I said we weren't going to do bios. We were just going to watch the presentation. But since we don't have that, I put the PDF in the chat box. So everybody is welcome to grab that PDF, download it. You can share it, distribute it, whatever you want to do with it. But Brent, tell us a little bit about your background and what are the things that you're passionate about when helping growers develop new markets?
Yeah, so thank you, Jessica. My background is I'm from Southeast Iowa. I live about 45 miles from where I grew up. So I'm over by the Fairfield area. I grew up over west of Ottumwa, Iowa, if you're familiar with that area, anyone. But I grew up on a purebred Simmental cow-calf operation. We run about 250 head of purebred Simmental cows. We have actually been utilizing cover crops and rye in our operation for hay and being able to increase the amount of row crop and productivity that we have, not having to have as much pasture ground, and also in terms of being able to have more of our cash crops available as well, but yet be able to utilize rye in that and as a forage essentially. So being able to take our operation from where we used to only have about 80 acres of row crop production to nearly 1,000 acres of row crop. And we've actually been doing that. We were one of the early adopters of cover crop in Southeast Iowa here. We started doing that in 2000, 2001. So we're going on about 20 years of being very, very strong with what cover crops are. I think that, with anything, there's always the ability to add more diversity with that, but it works for our operation. So we are looking at doing more things there. But so the cover crop side of things, I feel very strongly that it has a role, and being able to put that in, and also knowing just from firsthand knowledge there as well, being an early incorporator into some of the things that are outside the box. But going into with what I do now with Puris, I've been with Puris since 2016. And I'm here in our location in Oskaloosa, Iowa. And what I do is I'm a procurement manager. So I work directly with growers throughout the US. So currently I'm working with growers in 27 different states. It's actually increasing, it seems like, every single day as far as where we're procuring and having growers adopt and be able to grow field peas with Puris. What's very unique is Puris was founded in 1985 by Jerry Lorenzen, our CEO and founder. Primarily a soybean breeder is what the company was founded on. And in the early 90s, Jerry saw the importance to have basically a non-GMO germ, or as a lot of the germplasms in those soybeans were being brought up with Roundup traits inserted and more of the trait side of things. So seeing the importance of being able to feed people, and so saw that importance and had that there. In 97, started the facility here in Southeast Iowa in Oskaloosa. And actually in the late 90s, early 2000s, yellow field peas were experimented with and started to breed and select for, more so as just a nitrogen source to be able to help supplement with as like a green crop for yellow, or for your corn or crops that we're going to be using nitrogen. So that gave us a leg up, as now we are a plant-based protein manufacturer as far as the yellow field peas go. So we still do have the non-GMO side of the business. I work on the soybean side, but I work directly with our growers on our expansions here with yellow field peas throughout the US. And like I said, from 2016. So working directly with growers, figuring out ways to fit it into your operations, adding crop diversity. So we are as far southwest as California, Arizona area, and we are stretching as far east as South Carolina, North Carolina, Florida, everywhere basically in between, and then up to your more traditional areas, even in the Dakotas still. The two receiving locations that we have, so I know the transportation is probably something that we can speak to as well here as we continue to go. But we have the facility here in Southeast Iowa, Oskaloosa, which receives yellow field peas. And then we have the location in Harold, South Dakota, which is pretty central, just east of here for South Dakota. And then, go ahead, Jessica.
Oh, I was just going to ask, like, in your observations, since you come from a really strong farming background and your family has been involved in cover crops, what's been the biggest limiting factor with working with producers and adding this idea of, first off, you have to add in the education about cover crops, and then take it to the next level of this innovation of, hey, this cover crop could actually help your cash crop or be your cash crop. So what's kind of been the biggest barrier there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that everybody's operation is different, so there's barriers for everybody. I think the biggest barrier that we typically face in agriculture and in farming, and this is coming from me, I'm a fourth generation farmer, farm kid. So I know the traditional thought as far as incorporating cover crops or doing things differently than what your dad's dad did or what your grandpa did, and being able to kind of break up what that typical stigma is that we're doing it this way because I've done it year after year after year. So those are typically the biggest things there. The other thing that is just breaking that trend and looking at it from, and in the last 5 years, I believe that we've definitely seen a strong shift in being able to where agriculture is headed as far as regenerative practices and cover crop, adding diversity. Now, I'll be the first to admit that in the last 8 months, that thought has maybe started to trickle back with the short-term side of things with as we see the rallies here in corn and soybeans. So in our I states and in the Corn Belt, we start to look back and we look at that and we see growers that are, okay, well, maybe I can do it next year. Let's take advantage of what this is. Lots of people have not seen these types of prices maybe 3 times in their life. So those are some of the biggest things there. But I think that with peas being a short season crop, and I can get into some of the agronomic practices because it's going to vary as far as what an operator, Rick's operation is different than somebody that may be in Southwest Kansas or down in the Mississippi Delta. There's just a lot of different places that peas can fit into, and it's the nice thing that is about it is it's not every single operation is a square hole, square peg. This is how it is. With peas, they're not maybe necessarily a silver bullet, but they're definitely a great asset to have in the tool belt as far as what you're going to do. The short season crop side of things there is you're going to be able to have all these benefits that we're gaining with a cover crop, and those principles as far as water conservation, water quality, being able to have a unit and a half of nitrogen per bushel of yield, what you're gaining here. And as we start to see these things, as our commodity prices come up, so we're looking at anhydrous cost in conventional practices. We're probably going to be upwards of $1,000 a ton this year, which is last year that you could pre-book for $430 a ton on anhydrous. So those input costs are going up exponentially. Land cost in my area, I mean, we're looking at ground that's $12,000 to $14,000 an acre. Cash rents at $300, $350 an acre. Those values were just starting to come off of where they were for highs, and it took 8 years to get there where we hadn't even seen any budge. So now basically with these increased costs, we're going to see all of our inputs be going back up as well. So being able to increase your revenue per acre, being able to have a short season crop there that can have revenue to have your next crop. We start looking at south of I-80 and we're starting to look at second crop. So you're being able to double crop another crop here, or areas that essentially can grow basically during their off season because of their longer growing season as you're in the southern production here. So being able to increase basically food that we can produce per acre is huge as we are looking to meet the rising populations that we're going to have to feed here in the next 30 years by 2050. So those are definitely some big things. Now, as far as it goes with what growers look like, as far as when they're looking to put peas into their operation, everybody's operation is different. So figuring out, if we've got a cattle producer in South Dakota or Nebraska that they're looking for fall grazing, they're able to, or forage crop, producers that are looking to put a short season corn behind peas actually in Kansas. There's just so many different abilities that peas can let you do depending on your operation to bring value. And at the same time, we're working to improve that water quality. We're working to improve water conservation, which is becoming even more of a big thing there as well. And improving soil till. And you're also gaining productivity. Rick talks about species of how many different crop diversity he has, and even including the cattle operation on that side of things there. I think as we start to look at this, we have to get more creative and think outside the box, and peas are definitely a great asset there. And once we start to have those conversations with growers, that it lets you believe, or lets you get creative on what you're doing. You start to be able to say, oh, well, I can be able to increase what my land is doing, what my operation is doing. And in addition to that, by adding that crop diversity, when we start breaking up what that typical chain is of just corn, soybean rotation, all of your other crops, by introducing more crops, become way more productive. We see growers that come back to corn or their wheat, and their corn or wheat that's on a side-by-side next to where the peas were at, if it was fallow ground or if it was soybean production and just a typical rotation, we're seeing 10 to 20 bushel yield increase on that productiveness from that crop that's going to utilize the nitrogen, but also the improved soil tilth there from that.
Yeah, that's one thing that, Rick and I have talked about in the past too, is, how do you maximize that revenue per acre situation? And Rick, a couple things I'm going to pull out of the chat thinking about revenue per acre. A couple questions where, are you using the stubble for silage? Are you grazing it? What other options can you stack here when you're in a production system like this?
Yeah, it's like Brent said, I mean, the sky's the limit here. If you have the ability to build the infrastructure, the fence, and get the water, cattle are a huge part of this soil health building concept. And the peas I put in every forage package that we have cattle grazing on. I like to bring the cattle behind that harvest, but we've also got to be careful that we've got to save ourselves enough time to get that next cover crop planted so that we can gain the edge on next year's cash crop. So yes, there is grazing that does take place, but that's all based on timing of what time of the year that is happening. Now, I will though, Jess, I will go out and go ahead and drill in that cocktail with the cattle in the field. That doesn't hurt a thing. The cattle will walk that down and everything will be just fine. I think we might have lost Jessica again. Nope, there you are. I think you're on mute, Jess.
You'd think this was my first time, Rick. So, this is a question for Brent too, because he talks a lot to producers, and this is coming out of the chat. Your operation's pretty big, Rick, and I've talked to you enough to kind of know a little bit of this answer. How do you make this information digestible? So let me just lay out the next couple minutes, because I want to talk about making the conversation digestible to folks who are really wanting to take that first step. And then I still want to bring up some topics of barriers. And some people get skittish about planting the cover crops or planting something outside of the top commodity crops when it comes to barriers and, like cover crop protection or any sort of crop insurance issue. So that's laying out the next few questions. Rick and Brent, tell me, how do we make this digestible so that we have scale on these ideas?
Go ahead, Brent.
So I think I'm going to start with the digestibility of when you hear yellow field peas and it's outside the box, first thing that a lot of our producers think of is, okay, well, this is a specialty crop. Where am I going to go with it? Where's the market going to be? Okay, are these things going to sit in my bin for 2 to 3 years by the time that you need it? What type of scale, what type of size can I do? Are you looking at working with? So farm size, acres size is definitely big things there. We work with all shapes and sizes, just to let everybody know that from the start here. We work directly with organic and conventional growers. So lots of different technologies that producers are utilizing. So those are some of the things there to start with. Now, to get to the point of, yes, I look at yellow field peas still as a specialty crop, but when you start looking at the the size and the scope of what our facilities do, we're processing close to 100,000 bushel of peas a week between the two locations. It's 24/7, 363 days a year. So being able to have that confidence there with where this is going to go, when it's going to go, that it's going to go, knowing that our contracts are total production contracts. They have an act of God clause as well. So this kind of also goes into where the crop insurance, or what we actually have, is a coverage program, because we're growing peas. And the reason why we actually worked with developing a coverage program is because years ago we had 133 different producers in 133 different counties that were, and Rick's one of these guys that he was amazing about doing it, but willing to work with us on putting, being an innovator, taking that step, that plunge to put peas into the rotation. So we actually have a coverage program available that goes off of what our contracts are, and a grower will actually build their RMA and their T yields as they continue to grow. So now there's that net essentially that a producer knows. And a lot of that data came from our research and our plots that we have throughout the country to be able to develop those, and then work with our coverage program here to streamline it with our contracts, where a producer has that, that security that they're not exposed to all this risk. In addition to that as well, we actually have been working another thing here that coincided with the coverage program, is we actually now have financing even available, where our producers can be able to cover their input costs and then be able to deduct that, have that carried to when their crop is harvested as well. So we can be able to cover those input costs, and we're willing to partner with producers to streamline this and be able to take that stigma of a specialty crop and be able to have that insurance that you typically would see with your corn or soybeans, or your bigger mainstream crops that you see in your cropping rotations.
Yeah. Hey, Jess, let me throw something in there too. That was a great explanation, Brent. Thanks. The peas just make your operation become so flexible. I mean, you can bring them, plant them in the winter time. If these cold tolerant peas are a success, then we're there. They're there next spring. You could co-mingle them to a dairy. You could take them as a forage to a dairy. You could take them out to full seed production and separate the seed. You then can come behind that with another cash crop. I mean, it just gives you so many outs. And that's what I really like to look at anymore, is when I look at a crop rotation plan, I look for outs. And peas give me at least 5 outs. I can't think of another crop that gives me that many outs. And I also look at cattle as an out. If we have in our operation, Jess, we're walking tight ropes here all the time. This regenerative organic with no tillage is very difficult. So if a field would get away from us, cattle give us outs, we can still not have a big old goose egg, and we can graze those cattle. And if you had peas out there in this situation that maybe the weeds got too aggressive or whatever the case may be, you now have a tremendous forage to feed those cattle, get rate of gain. It's not a zero loss. You're still gaining something from it. So, you talk about digestibility. I think Brent and I have nailed it all the way around. I mean, it's a crop that should be in your rotation. If you are a dairy person, I think peas have to be in your rotation somewhere.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brent. Sorry.
No, I think exactly like Rick was saying, we look at it, and with being peas and with Puris, we're plant-based protein companies. So to be able to, and being a cattle kid like myself, I get really excited with working with cattle operations and livestock operations. Primarily part of that is I like that side of ag anyways, but being able to get creative and be able to have that great, if worst case scenario, like Rick is saying here, is that, with the peas being commingled, is having a great nutrition source for feed. Like the feed value is great on what peas are for feed. Now I want to be able to use them, and Puris does, for food. But in addition to that, I mean, cattle producers can turn around, and we had a grower in northwest Kansas last year, and like most of the United States last year, it was drought in a lot of different areas. So we had a producer that harvested his peas, had great yield on his peas, turned around, put in his cover crop of a rye mix, and his intentions were to bale it, graze it for just a little bit, and then bale it, get his cows back to the background and off on wheat stubble. They were as dry as they were. That rye turned into a saving grace because he could graze until basically December. He had 5 months that they were in extreme drought, that he had pasture available. He didn't have to start buying hay. So being able to get creative and be able to, I think cattle operations, dairy or backgrounding, having a cow-calf operation, it adds a lot of value with what those producers can do. And in addition to it as well, you're still even gaining a lot of value if you went the row crop, if you're just a row crop operation. Now, one thing that I didn't mention yet, and I really think that this is a big thing too, and is that when we start to break up these cycles of what we have continually selected for, one of the biggest things that I see that is, when I originally started, I didn't think about it being a benefit or seeing that, but our weed management is huge with peas. There are times when your typical weeds that we've selected for that have, as we start to see Roundup resistance between water hemp in our area, Palmer amaranth as you get south, those weeds have selected to be primarily grown with full season crops. So by being able to take peas off earlier, beating those selected for weeds, we're actually going to be able to extend or limit what our herbicides are, because we're breaking up that weed bank. So anytime that those, even if there is escapes in lamb's quarter or mare's tail, they're typically not going to be at seed. So you're actually limiting what we are seeing for herbicide, which is great because that's going to lower input costs. It's better for what your fields are as well. But we're also, even in those environments, we're actually going to increase the efficacies of what your current herbicides are if you are in that rotation. And that's part of the issue that we've ran into, is just seeing these typical herbicides basically where they start to lose their efficacy because it's timeliness of when things are done. So being able to break up that weed bank, I think, is a huge thing. And then the other thing that's nice about peas is a couple of our largest weeds that are pressures, peas do a very, very, very good job of suppressing. So your water hemp and your Palmer amaranth are weeds that we typically do not see in yellow field peas at all, because it drowns them out early. And that's why even in like organic production, it's great to have them, because you have ground cover this whole time.
Yeah, and talking about that, so Rick, in the chat, a couple questions that are coming up, and you hit on this a little bit. How does this offset your nitrogen availability? And Brent talked about commodity pricing going back up, which interestingly, Gail Fuller put in the comments, so do the input companies. That's the only people that are putting that back in their pocket. So how do you guys determine, how are you measuring your ability to decrease? Well, you don't use synthetic nitrogen, but how are you determining your nutrient management because of peas?
Well, yeah, I'm going to answer that to the way I used to farm. Nitrogen, I think, is about 80 cents a pound. It's probably going to be closer to $1 a pound. I am very fearful for the next 2 years of the farmer, because I'm afraid that their net income, and that's what this is all about. It's not about bushels you raise, it's about net income. And I'm afraid that all of the other inputs have gained in so much value that the farmers are really going to struggle to make ends meet in the next 2 years. So with that being said, it is all the more imperative to bring a P into the rotation, take advantage of that. I'm going to say 60 pounds of nitrogen to take advantage of at $1 a pound is $60. And you are going to be able to get that pea planted way cheaper than that. Plus you're getting the benefit of the pea that you've harvested, taking to Puris, gaining the income from that. Now you've still got the 60 pounds available that you're going to be able to reduce your synthetic load by. So yes, I think it's going to become, I think people are going to become very creative on how they are going to try to figure out how to reduce synthetic inputs. And this is going to put the P in front center spotlight.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Rick, there on that side of things. And I know it's a daily conversation that I have with multiple growers throughout the US is with these increased costs or with these increased commodity prices. It is great, but like you speak to, the input costs are going to be going up. And sometimes that's where you get a false security on what type of return we're seeing. And you're exactly right that in those, it's going to take more management as well. So being able to actively see those and be able to have, the other thing that's nice about peas is the nitrogen that we're getting, you're not going to see it leaching out. You know, I mean, you're going to have more natural form, a natural degradation, which, you know, I look back and granted, I haven't been farming the longest, but, you know, I've got close to 25 years now of knowing, you know, what things used to be and what things are now. And a lot of people are even changing, you know, the way that they're doing it. It used to be 200 pounds of anhydrous in the fall applied, and that's for 200 bushel of corn. So, you know, timeliness, having different forms of it readily available to the plant is more key there. And if you can have it naturally being there, and it's not even just the nitrogen that you're gaining too. I mean, the soil tilt, the improvement of that structure, that healing quality that peas bring into a rotation is definitely a huge thing that you gain there. And you're gaining water conservation too. I know that we're in a lot of drought areas where growers are currently harvesting peas in Western states and Northwest areas. And the root mass, that fibrous structure, the peas are primarily only actually up in the 2 to 3 inches of soil is where those are, but it's maintaining some of that subsoil moisture, and it's creating a great seed bed for producers that even are going to plant fall, you know, winter wheat. So being able to have that, as opposed to if you start looking at rye or oats, some of that soil gets kind of baked in that heat and that just drought conditions, which it makes for a powdery or nearly impossible to get through. So I get at least a call to 2 calls a day, amazed at what the soil structure actually, soil till that they're going into with peas. And one of the biggest things that I face with that is in areas that growers haven't put peas into their rotation until you actually see that return or see what it does. It's hard to put a value on that or able to even be able to express that in terms of what you see.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly, Deanna up north there was just asking about, you know, how do the peas affect the bacterial fungal balance, and, you know, how are you guys looking at that? And then soil testing, Rick, you know, it'd be interesting if you could kind of give us your soil sampling protocol and how you view that now in this pea rotation.
Yeah, I no longer do what I'm going to call the traditional soil health testing procedures. I no longer do that. Everything that we do is strictly based on Dr. Rick Haney's soil health test. and we have to remember that whatever test it is you're using, it's a picture of in time, at that particular moment in time. So I don't necessarily look at that data from that moment in time. I look at all of the years in the past that we've collected the data and look at what the trends are. Is organic matter trending up or trending down? Is organic carbon trending up or down? So on and so on. But the reason why, there's many reasons why I like Rick's test. He is invented a test that keeps the soil alive, and he's testing live soil, not dead soil. That's the number one thing. But there's a plethora of information that comes from this test, and we use every aspect of that. And when I look at a lot of different things that I think would affect the productivity of a field. And Brent is exactly correct. When you plant a pea, or even let's just say a legume like a clover, even what it does to the soil is like none other. So yes, it may be in that top 4 inches, but remember, that's where you're placing the next cash crop. So if you can place that in an environment that is conducive to rapid growth and success, then that's exactly what we're looking for.
Yeah, I popped a really cool article in the chat there about Rick Haney and his uncommon sense. And so we had the pleasure of spending a couple days with Rick and the family with Mitchell Hora over there in Iowa a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, okay. So Brent, do you have anything else to add about, you know, how you are advising the producers that you work with as far as soil health testing? And then kind of back to Deanna's question, like how do the peas affect the bacterial fungal balance of the soil? So at the, you know, here in a couple minutes, I want everybody to know we're going to go to open forum. So open forum is where I would like to invite everybody to start turning on their cameras. And if you do have a question, go ahead and use the reaction button, raise your hand. And we want to be super interactive and let you all go directly to our speakers or myself. And let's ask some questions. In particular, Steven Zwick in the chat has some really great questions I want to get to. So Brent, what are you thinking about, you know, how do you guys talk to your producers with different soil testing strategies right now?
Yeah, so we actually have a initiative as far as working directly with growers from our Minneapolis. I do not work as much with our soil health on these testings that we're doing. We actually have taken kind of a pledge to work with growers for an extended amount of time to see the soil regeneration and see what qualitative and quantitative characteristics we're getting back with those producers, with the peas incorporated into the rotations. One thing that's really tough for us to do is we have so many different types of rotations that we're seeing. So we actually want to see what type of response we're going from there. So we're continuing to build that. We know that you're gaining, like I said, the cover crop side of things there with the peas and seeing more performance. So we're continuing to see and research and have these data points collected through our initiatives with working directly with growers. But you know, what I look at is when I'm working with growers, yes, we want to see that increased as far as soil structure, you know, breaking up what the typical rotations would be, and because in turn that's going to make a producer more productive. It's going to help with what if you've got better soil, you're going to typically have better performance and from the plants themselves, healthier plants. As far as the bacterial and the fungal balance, I'm not quite sure what that is. I can definitely look into that. That's a great question. I am assuming, and like I said, that's an assumption, that you're going to see more beneficial bacteria, more beneficial fungi on that side of things there. But I know that there's definitely a lot more in depth that I could could get as far as what research agronomists and that are seeing. So I work primarily directly with growers, and so the soil science side of things there, that's probably a little bit over my head. I guarantee you there's definitely some great research articles, and we have a great team on our FTE side. So we actually have a agronomists on staff that are looking to get more and more answers that are quantitative here. So I definitely can follow up with some of our people on that. If you want to reach out to us on that, and Jessica, maybe we can present that to this Zoom call. But I don't want to say something and be wrong on it is kind of my biggest thing there where I'm coming from.
Yeah, sure. And go ahead, Rick, and then I'll follow up too.
All I want to say there is this, Jess. We've had peas in our cocktails for a long time, of some sort, not necessarily a yellow pea from Puris, but just peas in the cocktails. And I will say that since we started this journey of building soil health, starting Rick Haney's test, we were a bacterial-based farm. And now as we've shifted through time, we are now shifting to a fungal-based farm. And that's exactly where I want to be. You know, we need that mycorrhizal fungi. So I don't have scientific proof. I have Rick's test that says, hey, your soil used to be this, now it's this. Maybe that is scientific. But you know, is that all attributed to the peas? Probably not, but it is attributed to diversity. So peas have to be part of that diversity.
Totally. So Deanna, does that kind of answer your question a little bit? Is that what you guys are seeing on your operation? I'm kind of cold calling Deanna right now. So this is the time in the call where I want to welcome everybody to turn on their cameras. We've got some questions queued up here. Stephen put a really great question in the chat, but Deanna, I think I saw you pop on there. What question did you have, Deanna?
Nope, yeah, we've seen that too. We've had yellow peas in our rotation for quite a while. And we like them from a soil health perspective. And especially since we aren't using any sort of synthetic fertilizers. So I was just curious on what they're seeing for the fungal to bacterial ratio. So
yeah, and Deanna, go ahead and stick your link in the chat box. So Deanna does a lot of heirloom grains and heirloom wheat production, and she's really involved in this new market development and is a big supporter of GPR. So anybody else, like who else has peas in their rotation? What observations are you seeing right now that are beneficial to soil health? Okay, go ahead, Darren.
Okay, so I planted them with some wheat before. So my question's really to Rick. I had trouble getting them separated. The specific gravity of peas is the same as wheat. When I cut them together, I ran them across a fanning mill twice, plus a gravity table once.
Wow.
And I still ended up with some splits, some peas. I couldn't get it pure. What are you doing to keep them clean?
Well, I'll be honest with you. You're getting way more technical because I'm going to take them to a place that would have color sorters and all kinds of fandangled equipment to separate these two out. I mean, I've been told, Darren, that if you put 8 things together in a bag and threw them in there, you would have them all separated when it came out the other end. That's how good their process is. So I don't know what the names of all their screens are. I don't have all that with me today, but there are those people out there that can do that.
Okay. I haven't found any, but I'm in Kansas. So maybe
yeah, that was my question.
Because like I say, the specific gravity is the same on them. So I wasn't able to get them clean.
I think you're going to probably, in my, not knowing any more about it than what just taking a stab at it, size and shape here are probably the way you're going to separate them. The peas are round, the wheat's oblong. So you're going to need some kind of a screen that'll handle the wheat and the pea won't fall through.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I was able to get all the peas that held intact out of my wheat. What I couldn't get out was the splits. So when the peas would split, then I had trouble getting them out. I mean, I think we need to be doing more of this companion cropping thing.
Yeah.
But there's little things to be figured out along the way, I really like your idea of a more complete feed. Milo and cowpeas are a perfect example of something that goes really, really well together for a summer crop. So
yeah. Well, what I like about it, Darren, is the fact that you're adding diversity to the system within your cash crop rotation now. Plus, you have many more outs, and what do you do in Kansas when you've got corn planted and it's 103 degrees and there's no rain in sight? That
Yeah.
you're kind of locked into one thing there. So I like that potential for a way to still raise a cash crop is what I guess what I want to say.
yeah, they always do better together than they do separate. So the whole Milo and cowpea thing, along with other companions, really seems to be good. The challenge is, it's not really a challenge, but you got to do your homework, find a market, find a home for them, because you get docked if you haul it just into the regular commodity market. So,
oh yeah, you're
Well,
exactly
and
right.
that's what I like about this program we're hearing about, because I do feel like the program that Brent laid out is solutions based, and they've already, their goal is to come in to a particular region with some of this already kind of laid out for the producer. So I find that to be pretty appealing. On the call today, we have two of our Great Plains Regeneration board members, Gail Fuller's on here and Steve DeWitt. And, we talk weekly about new markets and new market development, and how do producers really tap into the mindset of the consumer. And in fact, Gail and I had dinner this week with some folks in Lawrence, Kansas, with another one of our board members. And we kind of realized that's probably one of the toughest topics to really bring up in agriculture right now and agree upon, is the desire of the consumer. Not to put you on the spot, Gail, but was there anything else that is kind of going through your mind that that just relates to this topic?
No, as you and I have discussed, Jess, it all is going to come down to the consumer. They will incentivize the farmers to do this. The consumers that are doing their homework, they do not want soy in their chickens. They do not want soy in their pigs. And you all know my opinion, there really isn't any room in regenerative agriculture for soybeans. It's a niche market at best. So much more diversity with peas, as Rick said, so many ways to go with them. They do such, you didn't even talk about what they do to meat. Our pork and our chicken is much better with peas in the ration than soy to begin with. So, and I think for farmers out there, I don't know a feed miller out there that is not looking for peas at the moment. So there's a market there. It's just to, it's getting farmers to jump ship off the soy bandwagon and start growing some more peas.
Yeah, and let me jump in there, Gail. You see the thing that we're losing, perspective on here is we've talked about a lot of ways that this pea can be utilized. And Puris, probably the original intention, and Brent can correct me, but it was a human food source. I'm assuming that's what the intention was. But there are so many other ways that this pea can help the meat, like Gail's talking about, help your soil health, help your diversity. It's just, when you look at corn or beans, they're not in the same league as what the diversification that the pea has. And that's why I like the pea so much.
So if I hear what you're both kind of reiterating, is that the pea has the opportunity to help us create healthier meat. Is that what I hear? And Brent, we talked about this earlier about the diversification of the portfolio of Puris. I mean, what are your thoughts? And you're a cattle guy, so.
Yeah, as far as palatability and nutrient there, I do see, even in, I didn't mention this, but we have show stock as well. So, I mean, we do breed and select for commercial operations. But even I see it in a lot of our supplements or some of our feeds in our show stock. So some of the premium feed stuff is actually listing as pea protein in some of these. So, like I said, we're completely food grade. That's what I want. That's where the premium market is going to be, is for food. But I'm even seeing in the feed side of things that we're starting to see pea protein or plant-based protein getting away from the soy. Peas don't need to be cooked. The trypsin inhibitor is not there in them. It's a cleaner protein structure as far as when you look at the molecular there. So you're typically going to see better efficiencies as well. So, for cattle feeders and that. And like I said, highly palatable. We have show goats is what we have. And I thought cattle were picky eaters. There's nothing pickier than a goat when it comes to eating. And if there's been byproducts or, any peas that we typically can't use, or in the past, I've actually fed peas to some of our goats, some of our nannies and stuff. And all about it. I mean, they highly palatable, clean the bunk, lick it completely clean. And I know that there's been times that I've fed them more of a corn or a soy pellet crumble that they just leave alone. So I think that you definitely would see that equate to even higher efficiencies at the feed bunk, which is going to lead to efficiencies economically as well. Now, like I said, I don't necessarily want to see stuff going the direction of all that for feed, because our end goal here at Puris is to have it for plant-based protein for human consumption. But it definitely, as you start to look at the direction that peas could go, it's very, very intriguing to see that you can get them more incorporated. And with, like what I said, with our demands and what we see for plant-based protein, we do see an increased uptick for yellow field peas from that side of things.
So Brent, you're wrong. You said there is nothing more picky than a goat. You're wrong. It's my 7-year-old daughter. My kids, give us a heck of a time when it comes to eating. So the elephant in the room, or maybe the cow in the room, is when you are going out and talking to producers, and Rick, you probably have had a little bit of this too. Is there pushback about the plant-based movement? Are there, what's the pushback? What are you seeing? And is there symbiosis with the two? To me, I hate that there's two sides. It's like conventional and organic. You have to be one or the other. Why are we so divisive in our world in the United States? Like, let's talk about that. I know you love this topic, Brent.
Yeah, so I'm glad that you brought that up, Jessica, because I do know that being in the industry that I'm also associated outside of, when I'm not wearing my Puris hat, which I typically am wearing both hats at the same time. I'm always connected 24/7 with my Puris hat on. But when conversations, I work with growers directly, and instead of let's talk about pea production, let's talk about putting them in your rotation, and then somebody get blindsided as far as a cattle operation or that it's beyond meat, or it's going into your plant-based meat substitute alternatives here. I tackle it head on. I talk directly with growers, and it's typically very direct on that side of things, that there has always been, and there is that stigma, from a meat producer. I mean, you're not going to take my ribeyes or my prime rib or my steaks away from me. I mean, I'm going to eat them. But there's a segment of the population that wants that plant-based diet. And to me, when I work with growers, and I mean, we even have growers that, they have kids that are vegetarian or vegan, but that alternative, and it's one of those things that we have that segment of population. I don't see plant-based protein or alternative meats as a direct competition with beef or poultry or pork, or because you don't see that. What you're not going to see a person as they typically increase their expendable income, switch what they're doing as far as what they're eating. You know, if it's going from a fish or a poultry up to a pork or a steak, like we typically you'd see more competition in that, as opposed to you're not going to see them go from beef to, as expendable income increases, go to plant-based, meat. That's not typically what we're seeing. These are two different segments of the market. And when I discuss this with growers, they start to say, okay, yeah, I see where we're going there. And as the American farmer or the American rancher, and being part of that, growing up in that lifestyle, I want to see us be able to provide that to the American consumer, as opposed to seeing them go to another country or go to China, because somebody will fill that demand, or they'll fill that demand by their supply. And is much better to be able to fill that and be able to have both consumers that the American farmer or rancher can be able to provide for. It's a big thing for us. I mean, that's why we want to stay domestic with our field peas that we're bringing into our facilities. And it's being able to, another thing that was great, and this is from this past winter, I was at a convention in Des Moines. And what was brought up is that our population is growing. And with that, it's not like the pie's going to get smaller, or the pieces of the pie, they don't even have to change. Everybody's piece of the pie could stay the exact same, the percent wise. And it's going to be that much larger as population continues to increase. So even if everything stays the same with where those percentages are, everybody's piece of the pie is getting bigger. So we need to be able to fulfill that as producers into each of those niches.
Yeah, and I think Frank has a question. Frank, did you have a question?
Yeah, just on the transitioning from a conventional farming into this newer type of farming. What I've found down here is that one of the biggest influences is the farmer's wife. If you can get to her, you can get a lot of things changed. And the other thing is, as an industry, you look at what your children in grade 5 and 6 are being taught in school. Now, our government down here has recently started a program which is being conducted by the states, and we're moving towards it, which is Kids to Farms. They've actually incorporated in the syllabus the different aspects of farming: sustainability, environmental, livestock production, and we're going to join the program for grades 5 and 6 because of our work with landscape management and water management. You've already seen the water management one, and also not growing ordinary sheep, make the livestock fit the landscape, not the landscape fit the stock. So that's where we're going through. But yeah, so we're going to have school kids from the city come on a bus to the farm for 2 or 3 hours, and I'm going to walk them around and chat them. And when they leave, I'm going to give them something to actually affect from a digital, because they're learning. They're learning the digital side, computers and all that. So I'm going to give each class a task of something that they can develop at school, which can help farmers or could help me. It's going to be an interesting program. It's not going to start for us until our summer, after the COVID thing. it looks like it's going to be a pretty good program, and it's going to be really interesting to have the views of these five and how these sort of what are they going to be? Grade 5 and 6,
Yeah.
10 and 11-year-olds. So,
And that's how
yeah.
old my kid is. You know, you make some really, really good points there, Frank. Keep sending me information and I'll be sure to share for you. But when you said, you know, you got to involve the women, you know, I'm looking at everybody in gallery view and everybody's head shaking. I see Christy, Crop Scout Christy, she's shaking her head, Gail Fuller, Rob, Kelly, you know, everybody really aligns with that idea. And I think for me, Brent, getting back to this question of like the meat eaters and non-meat eaters, I personally enjoy a good mushroom burger, you know, like taking different types of mushrooms and some quinoa and making a patty, you know, frying it up, kind of getting that crisp on it. I think what's disheartening for people that are focused about feeding their kids the healthy products and teaching them about health and nutrition is that some of these alternatives that are being produced have like a laundry list of ingredients. And I know those aren't Puris ingredients, you know, you guys are just a small portion of that and you're providing good quality. But I mean, I think that's kind of where sometimes the cattle producer thinks, man, I'm producing a whole food, a quality product that you know, I'm taking my time. And then folks that might have this alternative are getting like a laundry list of ingredients. So I think that might be some of the mindset too of potential pushback.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not a nutritionist at all from that side of things, especially. But I think, you know, there's to have that alternative though, even if it isn't necessary, to be able to have that enjoyment or that fulfillment of a burger. I mean, and for instance, you know, it may be one of those that if somebody's craving a burger and they would like to go to the plant-based side of things first, you know, they could grab that. But if they don't have that, I mean, perhaps, you know, what's to say that it's not a cheat day or something like that where somebody's, you know, getting a regular burger from that side of things. So I mean, that's my biggest thing is that I don't see it necessarily as a I don't want to tell anybody what they're going to choose to, you know, consume or and I don't think anybody needs to be that way from that side of things. And I think one thing that I seem like I have a lot of conversation with is just where we're at in our world and everything. This sometimes maybe instead of being so extreme one direction or so extreme the other, you know, looking at it and it doesn't matter what it is maybe somewhere in the middle is where everything is and the vast majority is, as opposed to what we're just hearing scream from one side or the other.
I agree. I totally agree. You know, the truth typically lies somewhere in the middle. And this has been just a great conversation. And I really appreciate everybody who has chimed in. I appreciate our speakers that were here. If it's okay, Rick, do you have any kind of closing thoughts about our conversation? And I didn't review GPR. And so of course I have to plug our company. So maybe after our closing remarks, if people still want to stick around, I can give you the short pitch on our nonprofit.
Sure. I will, first of all, Jess, I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me on your podcast. This is awesome. I think there was so many great things said today. There is room in this world for everything we've talked about. There's room for plant-based food. There's room for meats. There's room for all of this because there's a need for everything. So I agree with Brent. Let's don't get too far extreme thinking. Let's come back to more moderation, think more down the middle line. And from a farmer's perspective, I love the flexibility that the pea gives me. And I think it's going to do the same thing to other producers. And, you know, Brent said he's in 27 different states. So obviously the pea is adaptable in a lot of different climates. So again, just there's so many positives to the pea coming into your crop rotation. So again, thank you, Jess, and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much, Rick. And Brent, thank you for being here. You know, over the years, I've gotten to work with a lot of companies and a lot of people. I want to tell you that I appreciate that Puris is doing the good work before the press release. Okay, we see that a lot. We were talking about this on our last call with Dale Strickler and Lucinda Stunkel about companies are so quick to market themselves as XYZ without doing actual work, you know? And so one thing that my observation about your company is that you've taken time. I know that your team, there's some initiatives that have taken 10 years for you guys to develop before going to producers with it. So I appreciate that patience and that dedication. So any closing thoughts, Brent?
No, I definitely appreciate that, Jess. And, you know, also in addition to that too, though, just to streamline that or to add on to that is we're very fortunate with the growers that we've worked with, Rick included, that have been able to help and grow with us as well. And so that takes a lot. The growers that have helped us get to where we are and continue to grow. And we're excited. I'm excited to continue to work with more growers throughout the U.S. And if there is any interest of if peas will work or not, we want to make sure that we're working with growers to set up for the most success that they can have and being able to implement the peas into their rotation and see the benefits to their operation that they can have. So I do appreciate being invited here today, Jessica, and it was great to be able to have Rick and his insight and have a grower that's really helped experiment and continue to grow.
Awesome. Well, folks, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. What we're going to do next is I will finish the recording, and once it's done, I'll email it back to anybody who registered, and I will put everybody's contact information so that they can reach out to Rick with his company and Brent with Puris and then GPR. So folks, if you want to stick around, I'm going to stop the recording, and that's where we have a little bit more fun conversation.